know that the host does it, the co-host can't. And recording is started.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us. To begin, we will briefly introduce ourselves. I'm Luke Bailey,
I'm Lauren Gehrig.
and we are Education Program Consultants in the Attendance Accounting Office of School Fiscal Services Division.
I'm Dean Patterson, and I'm the administrator of the Attendance Accounting Office.
Throughout today's presentation, we will be referring to many terms using acronyms. For your reference, we have included a list of the acronyms used. Over the next hour and a half, we will provide reminders on instructional time and attendance accounting and highlight changes to the apportionment significant requirements in fiscal years 24-25 and 25-26. We will begin by discussing the instructional time requirements, touching on the importance of instructional time, the annual day and minute requirements, minimum day requirements, the school calendar, and bell schedule. In the attendance for apportionment section, we will provide a general overview of the requirements to generate average daily attendance, or ADA, which apply to students participating in in-person instruction and during independent study. Next, we will focus on independent study, including an overview of traditional and course-based independent study and key clarifications and legislative changes to these programs, including their durations and the changes in short-term agreements. We'll review ADA computations and how they impact funding, examine several scenarios, and discuss independent study limitations. Finally, we'll discuss key planning considerations for LEAs implementing these programs. Our transitional kindergarten section will go over the student eligibility and supervision requirements in effect with the full implementation of TK in fiscal year 25-26. We will also provide some resources to help understand how TK requirements are applied. In our Form J13A portion of the webinar, we will review the purpose of the Form J13A, discuss how it affects funding, cover recent changes to the process, including the required board-approved comprehensive school safety plan with Instructional Continuity Plan, and discuss how to prepare Form J13A submittals in fiscal year 25-26. Finally, we will give some key reminders and highlight our quick reference guide. Please note that this webinar is advisory in nature. It is not intended to cover in detail every statutory requirement and exception, nor should it be relied upon as the authority for instructional time and attendance accounting. Additionally, the information provided in this webinar is based on current laws and regulations as of April 30th, 2025. Any legislative changes made after April 30th, 2025 will be updated separately in future communications provided to the field.
Let's begin with instructional time. The Education Code prescribes the number of school days and instructional minutes that must be offered to each student. This varies by LEA type, grade span, and instructional setting. Compliance with this requirement is checked in each LEA's annual compliance audit. Non-compliance may result in fiscal penalties. Instructional time is both required by the California Constitution and essential for funding and many important student services. When students attend a scheduled day of school, they are provided with academic instruction by grade level, access to daily meals and mental health services, and the opportunity to learn social skills with their peers and teachers. California's instructional time requirements are in place because our state has a long history of believing that school is one of the safest environments for students. Student attendance and instructional time are an equity, health, and fiscal issue in California. It is important to note that instructional time requirements are not waivable by the SBE. There are annual day and minute requirements for school districts and charter schools. A school district is required to offer 180, and a charter school is required to offer 175 annual days of instruction per school year. Both entities are required to offer the following number of annual instructional minutes per grade span. PK and K, 36,000. 1 to 3, 50,400. 4 through 8, 54,000. 9 through 12, 64,800. As a reminder, the school year operates between July 1 and June 30th. School districts are required to maintain all of the elementary day schools and all of the day high schools for an equal length of time during the school year, which is known as the equity length of time requirement. This requirement is found in EC Section 37202. Equity length of time requirements are based on the annual instructional minute offering, which is illustrated in the box on the left. A day of school at a school district shall only count towards the instructional time requirements and for ADA purposes if it has been scheduled for at least the minimum day. This is known as a daily minute requirement. Please note that in general, the daily minute requirement is not applicable to charter schools. For COE programs, requirements are dependent upon the instructional setting. Compliance for these requirements is checked during the annual audit, and failure to comply will result in fiscal penalties. Please note that fiscal penalties may be waived by SBE if certain conditions are met. Day of school shall only count towards the instructional time requirements and for ADA purposes if it has been scheduled for at least the minimum day. This is not applicable to charter schools. While charter schools do not have daily instructional minute requirements, they are required to offer enough minutes in a school day to meet the annual instructional minute requirement. As stated in the previous slides, in addition to meeting the annual day and minute requirement, school districts and county programs must schedule students for a minimum number of minutes of instruction per day in order for the day to count towards meeting the annual instructional day requirement. This table reflects the daily instructional minute requirements for school districts by grade span and setting. COEs must also meet the minimum daily instructional minute requirements in order for the student's attendance to generate apportionment. This table reflects the requirements for county programs. Please note that for all LEAs, a special education student who has an IEP must be educated consistent with their IEP. Students with IEPs generate attendance based on traditional attendance accounting rules with regard to required supervision, and the instructional day length is established per the provisions of the IEP. Services stated on the IEP need to be provided as written, regardless of the student's setting. When the student is taught on a day consistent with their IEP, that student generates a day of attendance for that school day. We have included slides at the end of the presentation with links to the Education Code sections which speak to the minimum day requirements for school districts and COEs. As stated earlier, the school year starts on July 1 and ends on June 30th. The governing board of the school district has the authority to create and approve the school calendar. LEAs can adopt a single district-wide calendar or a calendar for each school site. A school month consists of 20 days or 4 weeks of 5 days each, including legal holidays. ADA is reported in full months. For school districts and COEs, the school week consists of 5 days, Monday to Friday. The authority to operate a 4-day school week must be provided for in statute. When school days are offered, it is for the purpose of meeting the requirements for the entire school year, which is 175 and 180 school days for charter schools and school districts, respectively. There is not a formal summer school program for apportionment purposes unless an LEA is operating extended school year programs. To generate ADA during the summer months need to be part of a full school year. Slide 10 describes the minimum number of minutes of instruction that must be provided to students for a charter school to claim ADA. To be clear, a charter school that operates a multi-track calendar must provide this number of instructional minutes for each instructional track. If a student enrolls into a charter school during the summer months, that student should be placed in a track operated by the charter school for a minimum of 175 days of instruction, as well as the required number of annual minutes. If a charter school only intends to offer students school days during the summer months, they are not meeting this requirement. To ensure compliance with ADA and instructional time requirements, charter schools and their authorizers should review summer enrollment policies. A charter school claiming ADA for apportionment for an instructional program that does not offer the minimum required instructional days and minutes in a school year may be subject to disallowed ADA and the associated fiscal penalties. The governing board of the LEA has the authority to determine the length of the school day. As a reminder, school calendars and bell schedules are both used to verify classroom-based instructional time compliance as part of each school's annual audit. The annual audit will confirm that the instructional time requirements are being met. If the LEA does not meet the conditions of statute, the LEA shall be subject to the associated statutory penalties. Supervisory requirements are also included in the annual audit. For all LEAs, instructional time is counted when the student is in attendance under the immediate supervision and control of a certificated employee of the LEA, engaged in educational activities required of them, and attendance is taken. Recess may be included for TK and kindergarten if students are under the immediate supervision and control of a certificated employee of the LEA. Passing time may be used when students are changing instructors and/or courses. Passing time is the actual time it takes to move from class to class and does not include time for going to a locker or the bathroom. SB 328 added EC Section 46148, which requires all charter schools and non-rural school districts to begin the school day at their middle and high schools no earlier than 8 or 8:30 a.m. respectively. Instructional time and attendance credit cannot be claimed for apportionment for instruction offered before the newly established start time. LEAs should consult with their legal counsel regarding the applicability of the bill's provisions to their programs. As mentioned briefly on the previous slide, instructional time and attendance credit cannot be claimed for apportionment for instruction offered before the newly established start time. In practical terms, This means that optional zero periods offered at non-rural school district and charter middle or high schools before 8 o'clock and 8:30 a.m. are not included in the instructional time calculations and are not included in ADA calculations. See Section 49056 requires public elementary school LEAs that offer recess to provide at least 30 minutes on regular instructional days and at least 15 minutes on early release days. EC Section 49056 defines recess as a period of time during the school day, separate and distinct from physical education courses and mealtimes, when students are given supervised and unstructured time for physical activity, play, organized games, and social engagement with peers. Recess time does not have to be offered in a single session and therefore may be offered via multiple sessions throughout the school day. Statutory requirements have not changed with regards to the instructional time requirements. With the exception of TK and kindergarten, recess is not included in instructional time calculations and may only be included if students are under the immediate supervision and control of a certificated employee. Additionally, EC Section 49056 prohibits school staff members from restricting a student's access unless there is an immediate threat to the physical safety of the student or the physical safety of one or more of the student's peers. If a student's recess period is denied, school staff members shall make all reasonable efforts to resolve such threats and minimize exclusion from recess. As a reminder, this law only applies to those public elementary school districts, COEs, and charter schools that include recess in their instructional time schedules. Moreover, LEAs have the authority to determine which grade levels will be provided recess. As LEAs are planning for next school year, the CDE recommends, if LEAs offer recess, that they evaluate their bell schedules and instructional minute offerings to ensure compliance with the instructional time requirements and avoid any potential audit finding and penalty. Instructional time requirements are included in each school's annual audit. As such, our team has compiled this best practice checklist to ensure that instructional time requirements are being met. Number 1, confirm the calculation of annual instructional minutes for the school year. Number 2, review bell schedules for each school site. All school sites must meet the day and minute requirements. Number 3, ensure that students are offered a full range of classes. Remember that a 0 or 7th optional period must include enough class options so there is sufficient breadth and quantity of classes to constitute a true offering, and does not, for example, only offer AP classes, band, or advanced art. Also remember that SB 328 disallows a non-rural district or charter school from including the instructional minutes of any class period at a middle school before 8 a.m. and high school before 8:30 a.m. Number 4, verify that any passing time is for the actual time it takes to pass between different classrooms. Passing time shall not exceed 10 minutes. LEAs can claim passing time before or after lunch, but not both. LEAs cannot claim breaks or lunch periods. Number 5, ensure any exceptions to student offerings, such as students participating in dual enrollment, meet the instructional time requirements. Number 6, verify that instructional time is provided by certificated employees of the LEA. Instructional time requirements that are verified during a school's annual audit include the annual day requirement for both school districts and charters, the annual minute requirement for both school districts and charters. The daily instructional minute requirement only for school districts, as charter schools do not have a daily instructional minute requirement. Whether the school has provided optional classes for both school districts and charters, and whether the school has a multi-track calendar for both school districts and charters. The penalties for not meeting the instructional time requirements are different for school districts and charter schools. As a reminder, the school district annual day penalties in EC sections 41420 and 46208 are calculated separately from the school district annual minute penalties in EC section 46207B. A charter school's total apportionment is proportionately reduced for each school day less than 175. Principal apportionment section, PACE, is responsible for the calculation and allocation of funds through the principal apportionment, which includes funding for the Local Control Funding Formula, LCFF, the primary source of an LEA's general purpose funding, special education, and funding for several other programs. The majority of LCFF funding is based on ADA. In order for ADA to count for state funding, LEAs must meet a significant number of statutory requirements, which include, but aren't limited to, instructional time requirements. Each requirement is distinct with its own fiscal consequences. Attendance and instructional time requirements vary by type of LEA, educational setting, and grade span. LEAs take attendance for two purposes: compulsory attendance and attendance for apportionment. Attendance for apportionment must meet the requirements in law. Examples of this are when students are offered the required numbers of days and minutes, and when students are under the immediate supervision and control of a certificated employee of the LEA. LEAs can only generate ADA in two ways: through in-person classroom-based instruction or through independent study. LEAs must keep records of student attendance to show compliance during their annual audit in order to avoid fiscal penalties. The formula for computing ADA is the number of days of student attendance divided by the number of calendar days school was taught. The next few slides highlight notable funding requirements that must be met in order to generate ADA. These slides provide a high-level overview and do not address every specific condition of apportionment. Notable funding requirements include instructional time, attendance, and supervision. The instructional time requirements include a full annual offering of minutes and days. For school districts, this includes daily scheduling requirements. Charter schools do not have minimum day requirements. As mentioned earlier, attendance for apportionment is either generated in person or through an independent study program. For independent study, the attendance is based on work product and synchronous instruction, if applicable, or satisfactory educational progress in certified courses. For in-person instruction, the student must be engaged in educational activities required of them. The supervision requirement for in-person instruction is that the student must be under the immediate supervision and control of a certificated employee of the LEA. The supervision requirement for independent study instruction is that the student must be under the general supervision and control of a certificated employee of the LEA. There are different age eligibility requirements depending on where the student is enrolled and what program the student is participating in. For school districts, there's no maximum age unless the student is participating in independent study or special education. For charter schools, students over the age of 19 must be continuously enrolled in public school, making satisfactory educational progress towards a high school diploma, and shall not be over the age of 22. For independent study, students that are continuously enrolled in a school district or COE cannot generate independent study ADA over the age of 21 years. Students that have been continuously enrolled in a charter school shall not generate independent study ADA over the age of 22 years. And students at any LEA that have not been continuously enrolled since their 18th birthday can only generate independent study ADA until they are 19. The residency requirements also depend on the type of school and program the student is enrolled and participating in. For school districts, the student must be a resident of the district unless an exception is provided for in law. For charter schools, the student must be a resident of California. For independent study, the student must be a resident of the county or adjacent county. The immunization requirement will be checked for compliance during the annual audit. Students must receive appropriate immunizations to participate in in-person instruction in California public schools. Conditional admission is permitted only if the requirements of CCR Title 17, Section 6035 are met. Immunization requirements are not applicable for students with IEPs and students who do not receive classroom-based instruction. There are ADA limitations that will be checked during the annual audit. Each student cannot generate more than 1 day of attendance per day. Additionally, some ADA is not fundable, such as excess independent study ADA and continuation and opportunity education independent study ADA over the 10% threshold. As stated on the previous slide, the immunization requirement is a condition of apportionment, meaning that LEAs face fiscal penalties when they are out of compliance. The annual audit will verify that a sample of kindergartners and 7th graders have received the necessary immunizations in order to participate in in-person instruction and generate ADA. Although only students in kindergarten and 7th grade are sampled, the immunization requirement applies to students at all grade levels. Non-compliance may also be found as a result of a separate audit from a local public health department or COE. The result of a non-compliance finding is the disallowance of all ADA generated by students who do not meet the immunization requirement.
This section highlights the independent study requirements and some of the recent changes to independent study. Independent study is an optional educational program which LEAs may choose but are not required to offer. When independent study is offered, it must be voluntary and include a classroom option for those students wishing to participate. Short-term independent study is intended to maintain the continuity of education. For example, when a student goes on a family vacation. Long-term independent study is an alternative to in-person instruction. Students in long-term independent study are typically participating for a semester or year of instruction. Given all the changes this year, independent study is a viable educational alternative, particularly when parts of the state are experiencing a loss of attendance due to immigration enforcement. All students in independent study must be offered the minimum annual instructional minutes and days that apply to their grade level and setting. All conditions of apportionment must be met in order to claim attendance for independent study. Compliance with statutory requirements will be checked during the annual audit. Independent study may be offered via traditional or course-based independent study. Traditional independent study, ADA, is based on the time value of the student's work product, or the time value of the student's work product and their participation in synchronous instruction and meeting all the apportionment significant requirements. LEAs are only able to count participation in synchronous instruction towards the instructional time and ADA calculations if it meets the conditions of EC Section 51747.5. A certificated employee of the LEA must determine and evaluate the time value of the work product, or the combined time value of the work product and student participation in synchronous instruction, for each student participating in traditional independent study. Please note that an LEA may only claim apportionment credit insofar as a student's participation in a synchronous instructional offering augments the time value of student work products. This means that synchronous instructional time can only be counted in addition to, not as a replacement for, asynchronous work. For school districts and COEs, students must complete a work product that is at least the equivalent in time value to a minimum school day of attendance in a classroom setting. For charter schools, students must complete a work product that equates to a full day of school as determined by a certificated employee of the charter school. Additionally, charter schools are required to have a daily engagement record. Course-based independent study, or CBIS, is based on enrollment and satisfactory educational progress in courses that are annually certified by the LEA's local governing board. If all other apportionment significant requirements are met, ADA can be generated through CBIS. A certificated employee of the LEA, or of an LEA that has a memorandum of understanding, must provide general supervision of the student's CBIS program. Students must be enrolled and making satisfactory educational progress in certified courses that meet minimum day requirements. The annual course certification includes instructional time and course credits. This information shall be consistent with that of classroom-based courses. The next two slides cover the independent study eligibility criteria that apply to students at school districts, COEs, and charter schools. The conditions shown on this slide must be met for a student to generate ADA through independent study at any LEA. Students must be enrolled at a school and placed in a grade level. Independent study is always voluntary. All students must have the option of classroom instruction. When a student is expelled, they are not eligible for independent study unless they have been allowed to return to the classroom. Students must be residents of the same county as the LEA claiming the ADA, or of an adjacent county. A student's residency cannot be established based on where their parent is employed. If a student has an IEP, the IEP must explicitly state that independent study is an appropriate method of delivering instruction for that student. Otherwise, the student is not eligible to participate and will not generate ADA through independent study. There are distinctions between the maximum age requirements for students enrolled at a school district or COE who are participating in independent study, and for students participating in non-classroom-based instruction at charter schools. Students over 21 cannot generate independent study ADA if they are enrolled in a school district or COE. If a school district or COE student has not been continuously enrolled since turning 18, they will only generate independent study ADA until they turn 19. Charter school students that have been continuously enrolled since their 18th birthday and are making satisfactory educational progress may participate in an independent study program until they are 22. Charter school students that are enrolled in an exclusive partnership program are exempt from the age eligibility requirements, although other requirements, such as residency, still apply. While students enrolled at continuation and opportunity schools and programs may participate in independent study, continuation and opportunity schools and programs are subject to a 10% cap on the amount of ADA that can be claimed through independent study instruction. The next few slides will review the changes made to the minimum offering, length of participation, written agreements, and ADA computation requirements for independent study that began in fiscal year 24-25. A key change that began with the 24-25 school year is the elimination of the minimum 3-day requirement for independent study. Now, all LEAs, including school districts and COEs, have the flexibility to offer independent study programs for as short as 1 day. Although there is no longer a minimum offering for independent study, it is important to note that independent study may not be used as a make-up attendance program. Prior to fiscal year 24-25, long-term independent study was defined as participation for 15 or more cumulative school days in a school year. Due to the recent changes in statute, long-term independent study will now be 16 or more cumulative days per school year. Also, prior to fiscal year 24-25, short-term independent study was defined as 14 or fewer cumulative days per school year. Now, it will be 15 or fewer cumulative days per school year. For students participating in independent study for 16 or more cumulative days, all requirements outlined in EC sections 51747D through F for traditional and 51749.5 for CBIS must be met for each day of instruction. Another notable change that began in the 24-25 school year is the updated timeline for obtaining signed written agreements for short-term independent study. While previously required within 10 days of enrollment, LEAs now have the flexibility to obtain the signed agreements at any point during the same school year. This change allows LEAs to be more responsive to students' needs, particularly in cases where the decision to participate in short-term independent study arises unexpectedly. For example, a student may need a short-term independent study arrangement due to a family emergency or a planned travel opportunity. In these situations, LEAs can offer independent study and then collect the signed written agreement within a reasonable time frame. It is recommended that LEAs make written agreements available to parents or guardians before or at the beginning of the school year. This allows families to understand the expectations and requirements of independent study. This can be accomplished by including the independent study written agreement with back-to-school paperwork. Then, when independent study is requested, supplemental agreements that include the dates of participation and due dates for the student's work can be generated, and the signed agreement can be collected at some point in the same school year. It is important to note that while the timing of collecting the signed written agreements is more flexible, all other independent study requirements must still be met from the first day of the student's participation, regardless of when the written agreement is signed. Each written agreement must be signed by all applicable parties, including the student's parent, legal guardian, or caregiver if the student is less than 18 years old, the certificated employee designated as having responsibility for the general supervision of independent study, and, if applicable, the certificated employee designated as having responsibility for special education. This slide shows the method in which LEAs will compute a day of attendance in independent study. Time spent in online programs can be counted as student work products and can be combined with synchronized instruction time to meet the minimum school day requirement for ADA. LEAs will add the time value of student work products, including documented time spent in online programs, and synchronous instruction. If the sum meets the minimum school day requirement and all other requirements are met, LEAs may credit 1 day of attendance. This calculation cannot result in more than 1 unit of ADA per student per day, and an LEA may only claim ADA insofar as a student's participation in a synchronous instructional offering augments the time value of student work products. This slide outlines an example of how ADA is computed for a school district or COE offering independent study. Let's break down the calculation on the left. The first step involves determining the time value of student work products. This includes the time value of tangible work products created by the student, as well as the time spent in an asynchronous instructional, such as online or computer-based programs where students don't produce a tangible work product. Next, we add the time value of documented synchronous instruction. Once again, we emphasize that this time value must augment the asynchronous work. These two sums are then added together to get the time value of traditional independent study total in hours. Finally, we divide this total time by the number of hours in a minimum day, which varies by grade span. The result is the total number of days of attendance for the student. Now, let's look at a concrete example on the right. The student spent 5 hours in documented online asynchronous instruction. In this case, there was no tangible work product, but the work was verified by a certificated teacher. The student also spent 25 hours creating tangible work products. Adding these together, and then adding 6 hours of documented synchronous instruction, we get a total time value of 36 hours for independent study. For grades 4 through 12, the minimum instructional day is 4 hours. So we divide 36 hours by 4. This gives us 9 days of attendance. This example illustrates how both asynchronous and synchronous learning, along with tangible work products, are accounted for in ADA calculations. Accurate documentation of student work and instructional time is critical for proper ADA reporting. The minimum instructional day requirement is a key factor in determining the number of attendance days. This slide provides an example of how ADA is calculated specifically for charter schools offering non-classroom based instruction. Again, we'll start with the calculation process on the left. The first step is to determine the time value of student work products, which includes the time value of tangible work products created by the student, as well as the time documented for asynchronous instruction. like online or computer-based programs where students don't produce a tangible work product. We then add the time value of documented synchronous instruction, which can only augment the asynchronous work time. This sum gives us the time value of non-classroom-based instruction total in hours. Next, we look at the student engagement log. This log documents the days the student was actively involved in educational activities. Finally, the teacher determines the number of days that the total hours equate to, based on the engagement log and the time value of instruction. This final determination yields the total number of days of attendance for the student. Now let's look at the specific example provided on the right. The student spent 5 hours on documented online asynchronous instruction. No tangible work product was produced, but the activity was verified by a certificated teacher. The student also spent 10 hours creating tangible work products. Adding these, and then adding 3 hours of documented synchronous instruction, we get a total time value of 18 hours for non-classroom-based instruction. The student engagement log shows that the student was engaged in educational activities for 5 days. Based on this engagement log and the time value, the teacher determined that the total hours equate to 5 days of attendance. Therefore, the student has generated 5 days of attendance. Now that we have discussed the way in which school districts, COEs, and charter schools should calculate a day of attendance for independent study, we will discuss the documentation requirements for that ADA computation. In order to claim ADA for independent study, a certificated employee of the LEA must now document each hour or fraction of an hour for all independent study instruction, including the time value of student work product, asynchronous instruction, and synchronous instruction as applicable. The certificated employee designated as providing general supervision determines a day of attendance based on this documentation. Failure to properly document independent study instruction may result in a non-compliance finding during the annual audit and an associated loss of apportionment. The method for documenting the time value of student work product or the time value of student work product and participation in synchronous instruction is through the supervising teacher's record book or register. The record book is the basis of apportionment and academic credit that the supervising teacher is required to keep for each student. The record book should include a comprehensive list of all assignments due and meetings held with the student. It is used in place of classroom attendance for the purpose of generating ADA. As a record of ADA and funding, record books must be kept for 3 years. LEAs must maintain contemporaneous attendance records by documenting each day a student is present or absent. An absence occurs when a student does not attend school or participate in independent study. School districts and COEs can recoup an absence for funding purposes by offering in-person Saturday school. Beginning in fiscal year 25-26, all LEAs can begin offering attendance recovery programs. LEAs cannot use independent study as a method to make up attendance once an absence has occurred and been recorded. In this example, student A becomes ill over the weekend and is absent from in-person instruction on Monday. The LEA records Monday as an absence in the attendance register. If the student is enrolled at a school district or COE, the school can recover the absence for funding purposes via Saturday school. Beginning in fiscal year 25-26, all LEAs can recover the absence for funding purposes through an attendance recovery program. In this example, student B becomes ill over the weekend and is absent from in-person instruction on Monday. On Monday, the LEA offers and provides independent study to student B. If the student agrees to participate and all other conditions of apportionment are met, the LEA records Monday as a day of attendance in the register. In this example, student C becomes ill over the weekend and is absent from in-person instruction on Monday. The LEA did not provide independent study to student C on Monday. Since the student did not attend in-person instruction or participate in independent study, the LEA must record Monday as an absence in the attendance register. If the LEA provides independent study to the student once they have returned to school, it is for the purposes of academic credit only. ADA cannot be earned as a student cannot generate more than one day of attendance in a school day. Please see Tuesday as an example. In addition to considering the limitations for independent study, there are other planning considerations for LEAs implementing or expanding their independent study programs. With new legislation, all LEAs must amend board policies to include updated written agreement requirements for short-term independent study and updates to short and long-term independent study duration to reflect that there is no minimum length of time requirement for any LEA. LEAs must also ensure written agreements are signed before the commencement of long-term independent study, which is 16 or more days. Written agreements can now be signed and collected during the same school year for short-term independent study, which is for 15 or fewer days. LEAs should ensure that all required elements are included in their updated written agreements. Minimum instructional time requirements must be met in order to receive ADA generated by students participating in independent study. LEAs must meet in minimum instructional time requirements for each student based on grade level. They must also accurately calculate and document instructional time, including the time value of student work products and synchronous instruction. For students participating in online or computer-based programs, LEAs must document the time that is recorded for the student by the online or computer-based program. Accurate reporting of ADA is crucial for receiving appropriate funding. All LEAs offering independent study must calculate and report their independent study ratio annually at the time of P2 reporting, and must accurately report all ADA, including any excess ADA, in the PADC web application. For charter schools, if the ADA population is more than 20% non-classroom based, the charter school must have a funding determination approved by the SBE. For continuation and opportunity schools, they must adhere to the 10% cap on independent study ADA.
This section outlines the requirements for transitional kindergarten upon full implementation in fiscal year 25-26. Fiscal year 25-26, TK will be fully implemented, and there will only be one type of TK student. Beginning in fiscal year 25-26, a child who will have their 4th birthday by September 1 shall be admitted to a TK program maintained by a school district or charter school. All TK students will generate ADA from the first day of school. Upon full implementation, there will be a 1-to-10 adult-to-student ratio in TK classrooms. The 1-to-10 adult-to-student ratio for fiscal year 25-26 will be based on an average by school site. The average class size requirement per school site in TK classrooms will be 24 students. Beginning August 1, 2025, statute requires certificated teachers assigned to a TK classroom and teachers providing independent study instruction to TK students in school districts and charter schools to meet at least one of the following options: 24 units in early childhood education, childhood development, or both, professional experience in a classroom setting with preschool-aged children that is comparable to the 24 units, a child development teacher permit, or an early childhood education specialist credential issued by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. As a reminder, the teacher credentialing requirements will be included in the annual audit for all schools providing TK programs beginning in the 25-26 school year. To summarize, the apportionment significant requirements for TK classrooms beginning in fiscal year 25-26 include the class size average maximum of 24 students, the adult to student ratio of 1 adult per 10 TK students, the TK classroom staffing requirement of 1 certificated employee and 2 assigned adults in the classroom. The 2 additional adults must be employees of the school district or charter school who are dedicated and available to all TK students for the duration of their time in the TK classroom. SFSD's TK FAQs can be found on the CDE website listed on the slide here for your reference. The TK compliance calculator is also listed on this slide for reference. Please note that the penalty calculator used to estimate the cost of a TK audit finding will be updated for fiscal year 25-26 in the coming months.
This portion of the webinar discusses the Form J13A used by LEAs facing emergency situations that disrupt instructional time. We will cover the basics of the form, its funding implications, the submission process, and significant legislative updates set to take effect in the upcoming fiscal years. In the case of emergencies, statute provides authority for a process for the state superintendent of public instruction to approve a waiver of the instructional time requirements in the event of a school closure and waiver for material decreases in average daily attendance. The stated purpose of this process is to ensure that LEAs receive the same apportionment as they would have received had the unforeseen event not occurred. This process is known as the Form J13A process. If the CDE approves the Form J13A for school closures, the LEA is authorized to maintain school for less than the required instructional days and minutes without being assigned a fiscal penalty to their LCFF funding. When an LEA closes due to an emergency, the LEA does not lose funding. ADA is still calculated as days attended divided by days taught. An approved Form J13A provides LEAs with a waiver of instructional time requirements. While not all-inclusive, the table to the right shows both common, approvable, and non-approvable events. Next few slides provide a detailed look at how days of attendance are calculated during school closures and for material decreases in attendance for school districts and then charter schools. Let's begin with school districts. For school districts without a fixed divisor that calculate ADA based on days taught, LEAs will immediately reduce their divisor for any school closure when reporting P1, P2, or annual ADA to CDE, disregarding whether the Form J13A closure request has been approved or not because it was not a day of instruction. For example, an LEA was originally set to have 180 days of instruction. As such, their divisor was 180. To calculate ADA, they would have divided the number of days of actual attendance over 180 days taught. The LEA then experienced an unforeseen school closure for 3 days during the school year. They now need to reduce their divisor from 180 to 177 and calculate their ADA based on the actual number of days attended over 177 days taught, whether or not their Form J13A request is approved. If their Form J13A request is approved, the LEA should keep the Form J13A approval letter to document the school's compliance with instructional time requirements, as the letter provides the authority to maintain school for less than the required annual instructional days and minutes without incurring a fiscal penalty. To reiterate, the purpose of a Form J13A waiver is to provide authority to maintain school for less than the required annual instructional days and minutes without incurring a fiscal penalty. The scenario in this slide demonstrates how a school closure at XYZ school district would not result in a loss in funding. Using a statewide absence rate of 8% and an enrollment population of 100 students, the school district would have 16,560 days of student attendance, which would then be divided by 180 days taught to equate to 92 ADA. If the school district experienced a 3-day emergency school closure, the district would have 16,284 days of attendance, which would then be divided by the amount of school days taught of 177. This would still equal 92 ADA. As you can see, although XYZ school district experienced a 3-day emergency school closure, their ADA remained the same and XYZ school district would not incur a loss of funding. When XYZ school district submits a Form J13A request, they are requesting approval for the 3 days of instructional time credit to prevent a fiscal penalty associated with failing to meet the instructional time requirements during their annual audit. This slide addresses the funding impact specific to charter school closures. Similar to school districts, for any school closure, charter schools must reduce their divisor, which represents days taught when reporting P1, P2, and annual ADA to the CDE. This reduction is required regardless of the approval status of the Form J13A closure request, because a closure day does not constitute a day of instruction. As the example shows, the original calculation includes a divisor of 175 days, corresponding to the 175-day annual day requirement for charter schools. If a 5-day closure occurs, the charter school should reduce their divisor by 5 because there was no instruction on those 5 days. This results in an adjusted divisor of 170 days. When the charter school calculates their ADA, they use this divisor in their calculation. This scenario in this slide demonstrates how a school closure at XYZ charter school impacts their ADA calculation. Let's look at the initial situation for XYZ charter school with no closure. It has a student population of 100 with an average absence rate of 8%. This means 92 students are attending each day on average. Over the planned 175 instructional days, the total days of student attendance would be 92 students multiplied by 175 days, which equals 16,100 days of attendance. This total attendance of 16,100 days is then divided by the divisor of 175 days taught, which equates to 92 ADA. Now, consider the impact of an emergency school closure. XYZ charter school experiences a 5-day closure due to a snowstorm. As required, the charter school reduces its divisor, the days taught, from 175 down to 170. The total days of student attendance must also reflect the reduced number of instructional days. This is now calculated as 92 students attending per day multiplied by the adjusted 170 days taught, which equates to 15,640 total attendance days. This adjusted attendance figure of 15,640 is then divided by the new divisor of 170 days taught. This calculation still results in 92 ADA. In this instance, XYZ charter school would not see a change in its ADA funding figure based on this closure event. When the charter school reports its ADA in the PDC web application, they would exclude the school closure days from the total days of operation. Without a Form J13A approval, the CDE would proportionally reduce funded ADA if XYZ charter school operated for less than the required 175 days of instruction. Upon the approval of a Form J13A school closure request, XYZ charter school would receive an instructional day and minute credit. This is done internally and does not require a corrected attendance file in the PDC web application. The credit will prevent a fiscal penalty for failure to meet the instructional time requirements. An LEA that calculates ADA using a fixed divisor should reduce their divisor only when CDE has approved the closure. Once the Form J13A approval letter has been received, the LEA should reduce their divisor, or days taught, by the days approved for closure. After the ADA has been recalculated using the reduced divisor, the LEA should submit the revised ADA to CDE. For a material decrease at all LEAs, LEAs will submit the actual attendance on the day of the emergency condition and should not make any adjustment to its ADA until the Form J13A approval letter has been received. Once the approval letter is received, the LEA will need to report the revised ADA in the PDC web application. It will be helpful to go into more detail about reporting changes due to an approval of Form J13A for a material decrease in attendance. We wanted to clarify the process for all Form J13As submitted for emergencies that take place up to June 30th, 2025. When submitting a Form J13A to the CDE, the LEA should complete all applicable sections of the form. The LEA should gather the signed certification form for independent study and a copy of the LEA's independent study plan. The certification form only needs to be provided with the LEA's first submission for each fiscal year. The LEA must include all necessary supporting documentation and include a school calendar. If a governor's declaration of emergency was in effect, a copy of that declaration should be included. The Form J13A can be submitted with wet, digital, or scanned wet signatures by a majority of the LEA's governing board members, the county superintendent, and witness for both the board members and the county superintendent. If the Form J13A is submitted for a charter school, the charter school's authorizer must also sign the affidavit. As a reminder, the certification form for independent study must also be signed with wet, digital, or scanned wet signatures by either the county superintendent, district superintendent, charter school administrator, or designee. Once the package is complete, the LEA will submit this to the COE, who will be responsible for signing the applicable sections of the affidavit with the wet, digital, or scanned wet signatures and sending the completed package to the CDE. The completed Form J13A package can be submitted to the CDE by email or mailed to the School Fiscal Services Division at the address listed on the Form J13A. If submitted by email, the LEA will receive an automated message from CDE confirming receipt. Please note all Form J13A requests should be sent to the CDE from the applicable COE. The ability to submit a request through email has not changed this part of the submittal process. The existing requirements for independent study documentation will remain in place for Form J13A submittals in the 25-26 fiscal year. LEAs must continue to submit a certified plan for which independent study will be offered to students that accompanies all Form J13A request. Due to the growing number of public health emergencies and natural disasters that have impacted the state in recent years, there is an increased need for LEAs to provide continuity of academic instruction for students who are unable to attend in-person instruction during an emergency event. The Independent Study Plan ensures LEAs have a method to provide continuity of academic instruction during an emergency event. Providing independent study is crucial in mitigating the negative impacts of lost learning time and supporting mental health. CDE encourages LEAs to offer independent study to students during emergency events pursuant to their independent study plan certification in order to minimize academic disruption and allow students to maintain academic progress. Submission of the certification form for independent study is still required to certify that the independent study plan submitted with the Form J13A includes requirements listed on the certification form. It's important to note that the approval of a Form J13A waiver is not conditioned upon implementation of the independent study plan. Please find our illustrated printable emergency timeline for Form J13A request in fiscal year 25-26 for your reference. Before moving on, we wanted to do some level setting by providing background information on the Comprehensive School Safety Plan, or CSSP, as the plan and its components will have a direct impact on Form J13A approvals beginning in fiscal year 26-27. Every TK through grade 12 public school is required to develop and maintain a CSSP designed to address campus risk, prepare for emergencies, and create a safe, secure learning environment for students and school personnel. School districts with fewer than 2,501 units of ADA may have one CSSP for all schools within the district. Each school is required to update and adopt its CSSP by March 1 annually. The school district or COE is responsible for approving CSSPs. Statute does not specify a date by which the CSSP must be approved by the school district or COE. However, they must annually notify the CDE by October 15th of any schools that have not complied with the requirements. One of the main changes made by the 2024-25 trailer bill is that LEAs must now add what's called an Instructional Continuity Plan, or ICP, to their CSSPs. The ICP ensures student and family engagement and continuity of academic instruction during emergency-related events. To aid LEAs in their development of ICPs, the CDE posted guidance on ICPs on the CDE website. LEAs must have a CSSP with an ICP by July 1, 2025. There will be new certification requirements for LEA submitting a Form J13A for events occurring after July 1, 2026. This applies to all LEA types, school districts, COEs, and charter schools. LEAs will need to certify that they followed their approved ICP during emergency events. Specifically, LEAs need to confirm that they communicated with families and students within 5 calendar days of the emergency. This could include notifying them about the disruption, explaining instructional plans, or providing resources for support. They must also confirm that they provided in-person instruction, remote instruction, or enrollment in another LEA within 10 instructional days. If an LEA is unable to meet these timelines, they must detail the circumstances that prevented them from doing so. They also need to describe any engagement and instruction they were able to provide during that time. The goal is to ensure that students continue to receive access to education and support during emergencies. These new requirements highlight the importance of having a well-prepared ICP and the ability to adapt quickly when unexpected events occur. Please note these requirements are based on current law. If there is trailer bill cleanup, our office will amend guidance as necessary. While ICPs are not required for Form J13A submissions in fiscal years 2024-25 and 25-26, the time to start preparing is now. Start by reviewing ICP best practice guidance on the CDE webpage. Include an ICP in the CSSP by July 1, 2025. The ICP must include protocols for establishing two-way communication with students and their families as soon as practicable, but no later than 5 calendar days following an emergency, and providing access to in-person or remote instruction as soon as practicable, but no more than 10 instructional days following the emergency. Prepare for verification of ICP compliance as part of the annual audit beginning in fiscal year 25-26. Begin submitting Form J13A requests with an ICP beginning July 1, 2026. In the event an LEA submits an incomplete Form J13A, the Attendance Accounting Office has implemented a streamlined process to expedite its review. If the CDE's attendance accounting office finds the Form J13A missing required items, such as the independent study certification form, they will return it via email to both the LEA and COE. The email will include the original submission and a helpful Form J13A additional items checklist. This checklist clearly identifies what is missing so that the LEA knows exactly what to fix or include. Once all the missing items are gathered and the form is complete, the LEA or the COE can easily resubmit the entire request to the CDE. This process will reduce correspondence and expedite the time it takes for an LEA to receive an outcome letter. CDE published a quick reference guide for Form J13A submittals for school closures. This guide has helpful information for LEAs prior to, during, and after an emergency. LEAs can find this reference guide in the resources section at the end of this presentation under Form J13A. This guide is applicable to all emergencies occurring up to June 30, 2026.
In order to support LEAs throughout the school year, here is a list of resources. These CDE website resources contain information regarding instructional time and attendance accounting. The link to a new web page on attendance recovery is also included here for reference. Please use the following links and contact emails to obtain more information regarding the Form J13A and the resources available to those LEAs experiencing an emergency. Here's more information about the CDE's new Frequently Asked Questions page dedicated to attendance recovery. On this page, you'll find FAQs organized under different tabs by topic, as well as a recent presentation on attendance recovery in PDF format. Contact details have been provided at the bottom of each section in order to direct you to the appropriate CDE offices for further information. The next few slides list the statutory references which have been mentioned today. This slide includes statutory references specific to school districts and county offices of education. This slide includes statutory references specific to charter schools. This slide includes statutory references specific to independent study. This slide includes statutory references specific to attendance recovery. For questions related to attendance for apportionment, instructional time, and the Form J13A, please contact attendanceaccounting@cde.ca.gov. For questions related to the Form J13A submittal process, please contact J13A submittals@cde.ca.gov. Thank you for attending the Spring Attendance Accounting and Instructional Time webinar. We hope you all have a great end of the school year. Goodbye.